So we're actually here for now to turn this into the 99% University. And so the point is not to have, we're going to have a brief but awesome talk from Dean Baker. And the topic is the Robin Hood tax, right? So there was a whole process of, of discussion within the Occupy K Street world of what were we going to do today. And the focus was that we were going to have a teach-in today, right, that follows on teach-ins that happened on Thursday and teach-ins that happened, on Tuesday and then on Thursday. And what we want to do is we want to be able to kind of really take up this idea of what is a Robin Hood tax, what is a financial transaction tax, ask questions, pull it, tug it, figure out what it means, figure out fully what it is, figure out what it would mean to embrace it or not, and all of those things. Here's a space to have that conversation and debate, and we've asked Dean to kick that off. Dean Baker's the head of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Many people know him best as the person who was right about the global economy and the US economy, when most everybody else seemed to think we were just going. And so has been a voice in the wilderness that seems like a little bit less of a wilderness right now, because now he gets called a lot more, I think. So, so anyway, I give you Dean Baker.
Does anybody in the far end of the room need coffee or tea? You want to make sure it gets over?
There's extra coffee.
And on behalf of IPS, we have some small brownies cut in half here. Not enough, so take them if you really want one.
Raise your hand, coffee or tea, so we know where to go. Okay.
Okay, I'll be fairly quick because I know you don't want to hear me blab on for too long. Let me just first say I think this is really fantastic. I mean, it would have been great if we could have been outside, but, whatever. I'm from Chicago, so this seems mild. But no, this really has been incredible. And, a lot of us have been doing, politics for a long, long time. And to see something like this just rise up spontaneously really is amazing. And it's been great that, people have, obviously people work getting people out. We know that. But the point is, this has resonated across the country, and as someone, I'm used to reading all the media and this stuff, and it started out, the media, ignored or ridiculed the Occupy movement. So if you look at the initial reporting, it's just derisive. Like, who are these clowns? What do they think they're doing? They're just upset they missed the 60s. And it's just so obvious that that was wrong, and we know it's wrong because people are coming out, and they don't have to come out. Everyone has other things they can do in their lives. We have a lot of people that are spending a lot of time DC, Wall Street, and around the country, and that's because it does resonate. And what's been really impressive is that you've had, the people in this town and elsewhere have to notice that, and that really, really is impressive. So I'm delighted if I can contribute anything to that. So before I start talking about the financial transactions tax or Robin Hood tax, I will be brief in my comments. Pitch for my colleague Mark Weisbrot will be giving a talk tomorrow at noon on the general global decline. And where's it going to be exactly?
It's going to be at
the park.
McPherson.
Oh, at McPherson. So you don't have to go anywhere. So, so you can
at noon?
At noon.
Tomorrow?
Tomorrow, yes. Okay, so the basic story, at least the way I think of a Robin Hood tax, is fairly simple. What we want to do with the tax is have the financial markets do what they're supposed to do. The basic story, people go, oh, you're against the financial sector. No, I'm not against the financial sector. The whole point is banks have a very important role to play. People want to put their money in banks. You want to save for college, retirement, whatever it might be. We need that. People need to go to a bank to borrow money for a home. People start businesses. That's great. And that's what the financial sector is supposed to do. That's not what it's been doing over the last 3 decades. What they've been doing over the last 3 decades has basically been gambling. Very sophisticated gambling, very complicated gambling, but what they've been doing to the greatest extent is gambling, and they've been largely neglecting the basic task of taking the money that people want to save and giving it to those who need to borrow for business, for a home, or whatever it might be. What we want them to do is go back to doing that. We want them to do what they're supposed to do, and in fact, they used to do. You could glorify, all of you have probably seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life, Jimmy Stewart, they did that to some extent. That's exaggerated. A lot of them were assholes even 50 years ago. But they basically did something like that. And that's what we want the tax. It's a small tax, and we'll see what we end up getting. It could be a 1/4 point, a 0.5 percentage point. It's going to be different whether it's stock or bonds or options. We can go into details insofar as people want. But the basic point is that it's a very small tax on transactions that if you're getting something, if you're getting a mortgage, if you're buying stock to save for your kids' college or retirement, it's going to be inconsequential. You know, how many people who have money in a 401k could even tell you what your transaction costs are? Probably next to no one. So suppose they were a little bit higher. Probably next to no one would even notice. Okay, so for people who are using the financial system for its normal purposes, they're using it to save for retirement, they're using it to borrow to buy a house, start a business, this would be almost invisible. Where it takes a really big hit is where you have the sort of gambling that we've been seeing on a really large scale over the last 3 decades. So where you see people creating complex derivative instruments, collateralized debt obligations that could involve all sorts of financial transactions. So you're over here, you have collateralized debt obligation. That includes a mortgage-backed security, which of course is the underlying mortgages. You could have credit default swaps written against that. You could have all sorts of transactions that are tied into this. And the whole point is you're not looking to hold this for 10 years. It's not that you think this is a good investment for 10 years. You're hoping to hold it maybe for just a day. You know, if you look at, some of you probably heard of The Big Short, this book, this guy got glorified because he shorted the housing market and made himself incredibly rich, John Paulson. Well, he just wanted to get in there and get out. He knew the thing was going down the tubes, so, you know, he wanted to get in there before things went down the tubes. That was his whole plan. He wanted to be very, very short term. And you have a huge amount of trading today that's literally by the minute, even by the second. In fact, there's complex computers. There's a very big market for this, where people have very complex computers, the whole purpose of which is to monitor the market, find patterns, and get in, say, a second or 2 seconds before other people. And if you're very heavily leveraged, you can make a huge amount of money that way. So in other words, if you see that the price of corn is rising, and you could step in there and get just before it rises a little bit, and then sell it a moment later, you've made a lot of money. Now, what does that do for society? Well, from the standpoint of society, that's purely parasitic, because we have people that produce corn, known as farmers. Okay, you know, well, you got in there before the price got higher, so you took away some of the money they might otherwise have had. Some farmers might have been able to sell at a higher price. You were very smart, you got in before them. Okay, the other side of the story, we have people who buy corn. You know, that would be us. You know, at the end of the day, we're going to eat corn, most of us. Maybe not all of us, most of us will eat corn at some point. Well, we're going to pay a little more for that, because this really smart person got in there, and he got it before we might otherwise have purchased it. Now, he made a lot of money on that. Okay, so who did he make money at the expense of? Well, on the one hand, the farmers, who got a little bit less than they might have otherwise. On the other hand, consumers, because at the end of the day, that higher price is going to get passed on to us. That's not a terribly good use of resources. Okay, and in some cases, the fact that you have people jumping in there, moving very short term, not caring at all about the fundamentals of the market. They're just looking to jump in there, market's going up, let's buy corn. The fact that you could do that could lead to a speculative bubble, and we've seen lots of examples of that. Okay, we saw the price of oil go up to $150 a barrel earlier this year. That was true of a lot of commodities, wheat, corn, across the board. Now, people made a lot of money on that. Had a very big downside to it because, you know, again, people are buying it. People are buying it at the other end. Here we had $4 a gallon gas. You know, no one's happy about that, but we're a relatively wealthy country. That was probably less big an issue than a lot of developing countries where food became unaffordable for an awful lot of people. So when you get a financial market that's blowing up a speculative bubble, that's not a good story. Now, the whole point of the tax, I can't say it's going to make everything right with financial markets. It won't. But it's going to make speculation like that much more risky. It's going to make a lot of short-term dealing more risky, and in some cases altogether unprofitable. Because if you're looking to buy, you know, literally get in there, you know, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds before anyone else, the margins you're looking at might not cover the tax. It might make that unprofitable. And these guys go nuts. They'll tell you that. I was at a reunion from college a couple of years ago, and I had someone I knew from college who's now on Wall Street came up to me. You know, I really like what you're doing, but you know, that transactions tax would kill us. And I kind of looked at him. It wasn't someone I knew that well. I was small school, and I said, yeah, that's the point. But you know, that is the point, and it's not the idea. It's not just being malicious. This is an incredible waste of resources. I mean, the idea, and this is just, you know, purely 100% straight economics. These people, in principle, could be doing something productive. It's not productive for them to get into the market 1 second before someone else so they could appropriate some of the difference. That's not a productive use of resources. That's 100% straight economics. We put a little tax on that, and you know, my buddy from college says, hey, it's going to kill him. Well, he's going to out and do something else. Smart guy. He'll find something else to do. That's what we want. We want people to do productive things. We want them to do something that's going to have benefit for society, not just be a parasite trying to get in there, squeeze a little bit out from everyone else. And that's the point of the tax. And the other part, of course, is it can raise a lot of money. You know, depending where it's set, how we structure it, raise 100 billion, possibly 150 billion. Maybe we could do better. But the point is we could raise a lot of money, and when we're in a situation and we have these deficit hawks hugely exaggerating our deficit problems, I won't go into that, but the point is we will need more money. If not today, we will need it down the road. And I can't think of a better place to get it than taxing financial speculation. We tax all sorts of other things, and I was saying before, when we were out in the rain, we tax gambling, and that's really how we should think about this. That if you want to gamble by playing the lottery, we tax you. Pay like a 30% tax, depending on the state, somewhere around 30%. Not on your winnings. I'm talking about your winnings. I mean, that's right off the top. If you go to Las Vegas or Atlantic City and you play a casino, that's taxed somewhere around 6%. If you bet on horses, I mean, whatever. We tax gambling. You can say it's good, you can say it's bad, but we do that. So if we tax all these other forms of gambling, why shouldn't we tax gambling on Wall Street? Okay, it's really that simple. Okay, one last thing I'll just say, because when I argue this with economists or people who think they know economics, they invariably say, oh, well, that's a great idea in abstract, but you can never enforce it. And I really have a lot of fun with this, because it's like one of the stupid things that smart people or people think they're smart say all the time. They go, oh, people will just evade it. No, depending on how hard you try to enforce it, you'll be able to enforce it more or less. But the great reputation of this is that it exists in the world. The United Kingdom actually has a tax. They just tax stock. They don't tax options, derivatives, all sorts of other instruments. And in fact, the government is not terribly committed. They have a conservative government, but even when they had a labor government, they were very supportive of the financial sector. They wanted to eliminate it. They would have if they could have found alternative funding. But they've had this tax. It dates back for centuries, literally. And they raise the equivalent of about 2 or 3/10% of their GDP. That'd be 30 to 40 billion a year in the United States, just taxing stock trades. Okay, so the people that are saying, oh, you could never enforce it, I always go, well, you better tell the people in England, because they think they're raising a lot of money on the tax. So, this argument that somehow it's not enforceable, and again, if you don't want to enforce a tax, you won't be able to enforce it. There's no doubt about it, and sometimes that happens, but that's due to political corruption. If you want to enforce the tax, we know how to enforce it, and as I say, the UK is proof. We've also had the tax in the US. The US actually had a small tax on stock transactions until the mid-60s, and when they eliminated it. So we do have a history of it even here in the United States. So the idea that this is just some crazy pie-in-the-sky idea, no, people are saying that simply don't know what they're talking about. It can be done, it is being done, and there's really not a good reason not to do it. So I'll stop with that, and I'm sure people have questions.
If we do that tax, how do you get that? But how do you get that passed? Do you have to go through Congress? And then they're the ones that got in there because they were, the corporate lobby.
No, that's exactly right. That's the world we're in. So people didn't hear that. How do you get the tax? You have to go through Congress. Yes, we have to go through Congress, and the people in Congress are 1%. I'm sorry?
They're corrupt assholes.
They're corrupt assholes. That's pretty much the case. No, that's what we got to do, and you have to have a lot of pressure on them. And this is, that's the great thing about, the Occupy movement is that it has created pressure. I mean, not that they're about to go out and pass a tax tomorrow, but the point is they understand people are out there. That's why President Obama talks about it. That's why Nancy Pelosi talks about it, and the Republicans talk about it to say, what was Cantor saying that, I forget what he said, he had something stupid to say about it. But the point is, it's going to take a mass movement. It's going to take a lot of pressure, a lot of power, but there's no doubt about it. The rules of the game are rigged. Yeah.
I just want to say that I'm a hospice nurse, so I take care of the dying, and I have never seen a death certificate where the cause of death was death by transaction tax. So, that's all I want to say.
We'll literally kill him. Yeah, I like the guy who wants to be killed. So, yeah.
This is kind of a technical question, but sort of given that financial markets have sort of moved away from market making towards high-frequency trading, making up, I don't know, like maybe 80% of volumes or something now, would the result, or why wouldn't it be the case that the result of such a tax would be to just widen the spreads by that amount, and then it would remain profitable, but you just have wider spreads?
Well, for people to know, the spread is the difference between what the buyer gets and what the seller pays. And this is, you have a middle person that, a specialty trader, or these days it's typically a high-frequency platform that, basically collects that. So the question is, if you impose this tax, wouldn't we expect that the spreads would widen?
So it would stay profitable and it would continue to happen. We just raise money off of it, but it wouldn't eliminate the behavior. Is the question.
Well, that's good. Well, we would eliminate a lot of the behavior because a lot of it is based on very small margins. So you would eliminate a lot of it. You wouldn't eliminate it altogether. So what we'd see is basically because it costs you more for each trade, we would see a lot less trading. What's kind of nice about this, and there's a fair bit of research on it and some range of numbers, but what most of the research shows is that people respond to an increase in cost of trading by trading less, not surprisingly. But it's roughly 1-to-1, meaning that let's say the tax doubled the cost of trading. The tax that I worked on with a friend of mine, Bob Poland, who's at the University of Massachusetts, we tried to design it so that it would double the cost of trading. So we had different taxes for different assets. We tried to find what evidence we could on trading costs. We wanted to double the cost of trading. The evidence is that that would lead to a reduction in trading volume of roughly 50%. So it's a really, really nice story. I'm not going to say it works out exactly like this, but basically, let's imagine that we have someone who has money in 401k. They're saving for retirement. So currently, their 401k trades 20% a year. They're not doing it, but the person who manages the 401k is doing that. You double the cost of trading, they cut back their trading to 10% a year. Turns over 10% a year. They're going to pay the exact same amount on trading with the tax as they did before. The margins, this is going to be twice as high now, but they're trading half as much. So basically, it ends up being a wash for them. The person who gets hurt in that story is the financial intermediary, which is just fine because they weren't doing anything useful. Trading the 401k at a 20% rate wasn't doing anything productive. If you cut it back to 10%, no big deal from that standpoint. So it ends up overwhelmingly the cost comes from the financial intermediaries. Did you
we can talk after.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm a campaigner, so when I'm hearing this, I'm thinking about what's the best way to message this. Like, how do we talk about this in a way that one takes this big concept down in a way that you can have like a doorstep conversation about it? And then how do you run a campaign to get this implemented?
Well, I mean, talking about taxing financial speculation, and obviously part of the story is the tax, part of it is what we want to use the money for, and there's a whole set of things that obviously we could use the money for. But I think that the main point to my mind is that we're taxing something that's basically destructive, which, we think of, all the different ways of raising revenue. Most of them are taxing things that are at least somewhat useful. I mean, we can't tax pollution, which would be good. But, most of the things we tax, we pay Social Security taxes. We don't want people to have to pay more, but we need that for Social Security. We need, most of the things we want to tax, we're taxing things that we might think of as in general being good. In this case, we're taxing something that's harmful. So I put it as like taxing harmful speculation. And then in order to, and again, we have a whole set of needs, healthcare being one of them, one very important one, many, many others. But I think the key thing is to say that we're talking about taxing harmful speculation. Yeah.
I'll go a little bit deeper on this question. In the 1920s and 30s, there was all this speculation and all this sort of stuff went on, which led to the Great Depression, and as a result of that, we passed all sorts of laws, Glass-Steagall, National Labor Relations Act, all sorts of efforts, Security and Exchange Commission was set up. All these things were done, and we still wound up having the Second World War and killing 80 million people. Now, 60 years later, the same sort of situation has developed again. These guys somehow managed to get rid of all those rules and regulations, or most of them, divide loopholes in them, and we go through the same process again. Personally, I think that I'm tired. I gave them a chance once. I didn't personally, but we gave them a chance once to straighten out their system. And it cost us 80 million people dying in the Second World War. I'm not giving them another chance. I think it's time to get rid of capitalism itself.
Thank you.
I don't think we should, just think about reforming the system. We should think about destroying it. I'm nothing against a transaction tax, but I'm not going to put all my energy into lobbying Congress and talking to politicians and trying to convince them to save the system by instituting this new tax, which is sort of the miracle tax now. I mean, no, we've got to change the basic fundamental structure of our society to a more cooperative society that's based on people working together, cooperating, not making money for the rich people. The second thing is I'm not sure how, even the transactions, I'm not sure how you prevent it from the cost of it being transferred to the people that own the stocks. And like, for example, our pension fund, I used to be a trustee of the transit employees here in Washington. We had a $2 billion pension fund, which is our money for the future. And we have stock managers, because I don't know how to manage this. And they, so they, whatever cost, they always, they have brokerage fees, they make us pay. they have management fees they make us pay. I presume the transaction tax fee will make us pay that also. And so at the end of the day, we'll have less money. And people like Warren Buffett, I mean, they don't buy and sell stock for the most part. They hold on to them so they can control these giant corporations. So you got, I guess, these little speculators who, you know, suppose they're going to pay the tax, but I'm not really sure. And then when I hear that Sarkozy's in favor of it, and Miss Merkel in Germany's in favor, I begin to wonder, you know, what side are we on? I don't want to be a part of a movement that these people are supporting and are championing it, basically.
Well, you can pick whatever movement you want to be part of, but as far as I know, they've also been supportive of measures to stop global warming. So I don't know, you pro-global warming? I think if you pick what movements you're going to support by who's on your side, you're going to have a lot of trouble. But let me just answer your question about being passed on. As I was saying, there's a lot of evidence that if you increase the transactions cost, people will reduce the trading volume. Now, if you have a pension fund that's run by corrupt people, I can't tell you. You know, yeah, they'll do whatever. Maybe they'll just double their fees because today's Saturday. They might. I don't know. You know, the problem is not to have pension funds that are run by corrupt people, and a lot are. But that's got nothing to do with transactions tax. So you know, so I agree. You have a lot of problems. You know, Steve Ratner, who was Obama's original car czar, he ended up making a deal with the Justice Department. He agreed to pay $10 million to settle a case where what he was charged with was making a payment to the New York State Pension Fund to manage their money. So, you know, obviously that was pretty corrupt. He wouldn't have made the payment unless, you know, he expected to have excess fees. You know, so you have that. That's a real problem. Transaction tax is kind of aside that. You know, if you have corrupt people there, they're going to rip you off whether or not you have a transactions tax.
Well, I just want to support that concern that I have about, say, if you have mutual funds or retirement funds, you know, we get shafted quite a lot with fees, you know, and some of us don't have anything other than that, you know, and so there's concern with that, and I think that needs to be looked at. But I also wonder, if this tax does proceed, then how do you, how are you proposing to ensure the distribution of the funds to the organizations and the sources that you want it to go to? You know, rather than like supporting the military.
No, really good question. Okay, so for people who didn't hear, the first part of the question was with mutual funds that they charge high fees, how do you just prevent this from being passed on in the fees? The second question is how do you ensure that whatever money's raised goes to something useful rather than just the military? As far as the first part, it is a very good question. I mean, mutual funds rip people off like crazy now. And just to get an idea of the scale of what we're talking about, a typical mutual fund fee is over 1%. Some are over 1.5%, some are close to 2%. The lower cost ones are about 0.2%. So the idea here is there's a lot of fat there. A lot of people are making off like bandits. We have a real problem with mutual funds that rip people off, and you know there's a few things we should do about that. Among others, have clear disclosure and some more regulation in that sector, so that people can see what's going on with their mutual fund. A lot of times, people don't have a lot of choice in it. Like if your employer puts you in this one or that one, so there's a lot of issues there. In terms of the fees being passed on, again, if your mutual fund isn't totally corrupt, which some are, but if it's not totally corrupt, what you would expect is that they will trade less because they have higher costs, and there really wouldn't be anything then to pass on. So again, no guarantees of that, but that's in principle what should happen. Now in terms of what happens with the money, I mean, we're in the same boat we always are, you know, and if all I could say is that if it really were the case, we aren't going to get a transactions tax without bringing these people in Congress, you know, like kicking and screaming, because they do not want to do that. This is their friends on Wall Street. This is anathema to them. So if it really were the case that there was enough public pressure to get a financial speculation tax, it's pretty hard to believe there wouldn't also be a lot of public pressure to ensure that that money was used for something productive. So again, no guarantees, but you know, it's a really big road to get the tax in place. So I think we're talking about a very different world.
But there was a lockbox on the Social Security fund too, right? And they took all the problem is that they took all the money out of it.
Social Security actually did exactly what the law required. 100%.
What the law wasn't written up. I didn't know that.
No. So Social Security has been 100% following the law till now. We'll see what happens.
Dean, you've got a question over there.
Yeah. Okay. So is the question over here? Yes. I'm sorry.
Okay. Admittedly, my economics education comes from arts high school, so it's not great.
So I'm not so bad then.
Could you explain the mechanism where, like, I would love a law that's written like this tax only applies to like rich people and not regular folks, but like how exactly does it work that it only taxes certain kinds of transactions?
No, it would tax all transactions. The point is that for most of us, if you're, the tax would be very trivial. So, let's say it's a quarter of 1%, 25 hundredths of 1% on a stock trade. So when I'm looking to buy stock, I'm going to keep it till I retire. I don't know, I couldn't even tell you offhand what the brokerage fee would typically be. It'd be much more than 25 hundredths of 1%. So that would be somewhat higher. When I sell it, 15, 20 years from now, I'm going to pay the tax on that side too, 25 hundredths of 1%. I would have to pay it. But that's going to be very trivial for me because I'm not looking to buy and sell day by day. And, I have a 401k and, that's managed. I don't know what's going on with that. In principle, what I would expect is, as I say, they would trade less in response to the tax. And I wouldn't expect it's going to be zero. I expect it just to be very, very low because 25 hundredths of 1%, if I go to the store over here and get another shirt, I'm going to have to pay 8% sales tax. So we're talking about 25 hundredths of 1%. We're talking about a really small tax. Some of that undoubtedly will be paid by ordinary people. It's pretty hard to design a tax that will literally just hit the rich. But the people who will feel it the most are people like, people who run hedge funds that make hundreds of millions of dollars a year, many of which are literally premised on, buying at 1 o'clock, selling at 1:30. They're looking to take advantage of very small margins in between prices, between the buy price and sell price. And those are the people who get hit hardest. But I couldn't tell you that it's not going to hit anyone that, isn't more moderate income, middle income. You really can't design a tax that won't have some effect on it.
I'm just wondering if the financial transaction tax would work in conjunction or is better than the Obama bank tax. He proposed the one on risky assets of banks. All that.
Well, the transactions tax would in principle be a lot bigger. The bank tax he proposed would raise somewhere in the order of $6 or $7 billion a year. Transactions tax, again, depends what rates you talk about. The rates that I'd written about could raise over $100 billion a year. It would be a bigger tax. I don't think the tax he was proposing would be a bad tax. The tax he was proposing was that for banks that have more than $50 billion a year in assets, they would have to pay a small tax, and I'm forgetting what the rate was on their assets in excess of $50 billion. That's like 50 banks are in that category. So I think that's not a bad thing to do, but the amount of money that would raise would be considerably less. And there's no reason you couldn't have both together. That's fine by me. Yeah.
Could you please explain the connection between supporting global warming and those who want to do away with capitalism instead of tweaking it with your tax? You said if we don't want to do that, we're supporting global warming.
No, I wasn't saying that. I'll be as clear as I can.
You exactly said that.
No, I didn't say exactly. The suggestion was that we should not support this tax because Sarkozy and Merkel support the tax, and we don't want to be on the same side as people as Sarkozy and Merkel. Sarkozy and Merkel have also supported measures to stem global warming. So if we're going to pick what movements we join by who's in that camp, then we would have to be opposed to anything to stop global warming because Sarkozy and Merkel also want to take steps to stop global warming. That's what I said.
Can I say something? Because I'm French. I just want to say to everybody that the 99% of French people are supporting you and watching at you, and you are a great hope for European people. But to the question of Sarkozy, he is for the tax because he doesn't want the left party in France to be for the tax for the next presidential. So he is not for the tax for many years. He's for the tax only for a few months. And it's purely conjectural. And my question would be, the main criticism in France, because the debate has advanced a lot for the last years, because it's a revendication from the social movement for the last 10 years. Now the criticism is, the critics are, the speculation is going in the offshore place. And so they say, either we have to do a global tax for the whole world or no tax, but it's quasi impossible to have a global tax because of the 1%.
Well, there's a few things. Again, this gets a lot to the issue of these taxes are enforceable to the extent that they want to enforce them. First off, as I say, in the UK, you know, it's obviously not a global tax, it's just one country, and they raise a lot of money
It's
off
not
of
a
it.
transaction tax.
Yeah, it's buying and selling stock, yeah. The transactions in stock, yeah. So obviously, it doesn't all go offshore. Secondly, you know, there is a lot of support. If the United States were to get behind it, since you have most of the European Union behind it, you would have most of the globe. Now, there's still the issue, you know, the argument goes, okay, everyone will go over to the Cayman Islands. And this is kind of, I made this joke, this is sort of the incredible Hulk theory of international politics. Because, you know, when the United States wants something done in the world, you know, think of the war on terrorism. Let's imagine for the moment that Cayman Islands was an outpost of Al-Qaeda, and they were funneling arms. Do you think we'd be sitting there going, you know, it's really, you know, awful that, you know, Cayman Islands are funneling arms for Al-Qaeda? I don't think that would be the case. Now, I'm not suggesting that we would have an armed takeover of the Cayman Islands. It's a more simple point that the Cayman Islands can only act as a tax haven insofar as we want them to be a tax haven. We could, for example, basically cut them off from the international banking system. So with the speculators who want to speculate and avoid the tax, what are they going to do? Get piles of gold and go to the Cayman Islands? And they might do that. I just don't think it would happen. So realistically, these tax havens exist to the extent that big countries like the United States want them to exist. And that's the issue. Now, again, if we have people that aren't committed to enforcing the tax and they want to have loopholes, they'll just, you know, look the other way. Oh, yeah, you know, we missed that, you know. But if it's a practical question of, okay, we're serious about having this tax, we're serious about enforcing it, you're not going to see mass evasion to the Cayman Islands.
That's my kind of
related. The Swiss banks are now cooperating with the U.S. prosecutors to start getting these tax savings.
Yeah, no, that's right. And this is actually an interesting story that there were efforts to crack down on money laundering and tax evasion in the Clinton administration, which I'm not going to say great things about, but they were actually somewhat serious about that. Those went by the wayside when Bush came in. That he was like said, okay, we don't want to do anything about this. You know, we shouldn't be doing that. Obama, to his credit, this is one of the things that he has done somewhat positively is tried to take that seriously. So to get places like Switzerland that, you know, were tax havens to clamp down, and we can do that. So if you're serious about the tax, it's not as though we're going to have all these little places, you know, acting in defiance of the U.S. and having mass evasion. There'll always be some. I mean, look, there's no tax that's 100% enforced, but the point is we could make sure that most of it's enforced. Yeah.
I'm just curious, again, probably out of ignorance, but I don't fully understand why having this kind of tax wouldn't sort of reduce the value of like pension funds or like the kinds of investments in financial markets that like working people typically have. Like you were saying that like, so if you have a 50% tax, if you raise the cost of like trading by 50%, that'll reduce the volume of trading by 50%. Does that also mean it's that people just go for that whoever's managing those investments is just going to go for trades with half again higher margins to correct for that, or will it just at the margin reduce the value of, you know, your 401k?
I suspect a very, very little impact on the value. I mean, one of the things to keep in mind is we've had a sharp decline in trading costs over the last 3 decades because of computerization. So if you looked at the cost of trading from, say, the mid-'70s to the present, it's probably fallen around 70 to 80%. I don't know anyone who says that, you know, that's had a big impact on stock prices. I would say it's had zero impact. But when you talk about taxes at the levels that, you know, have been discussed, you talk about raising trading costs back to where they were maybe 20, 25, 30 years ago. So would it have no effect? I couldn't say it have no effect, but my guess is it would have relatively little effect. And, you know, again, a lot of this gets back to, you know, look, we're not going to have a tax that doesn't affect middle-income people at all. The point is that, you know, the effect on middle-income people here is likely to be very, very small. The big impact is going to be on the wealthy, and particularly on those people who are involved in this sort of high-frequency trading, short-order trading, highly leveraged trading. Yeah.
As we already have an appropriations issue in many of our federal agencies, and it's basically the Congress's fault that we have this issue. Considering that, and that it's well known in many federal agencies that we already have that issue. Is the social good that would come of this tax preventing people from siphoning off little pennies or whatever on every transaction that they made in 1 minute time spans? Would the social good of preventing those by making this tax outweigh even the giving of the government an extra $80 billion a year just to throw at tanks and whatever have you? If that should happen, as it often does.
Well, You know, I mean, again, this is going to depend on what the politics look like in the event you get the tax. In the event that we actually have enough political pressure to get the tax, it's hard for me to believe that we wouldn't also have some ability to make sure that it went for productive uses. But, you know, there's no guarantee. You know, you could get a situation where, let's say, you know, 2 years, 3 years, whatever time frame is, we get the tax, and maybe initially it does go for good things. But then, you know, things change, you know, the bad guys get together again, and, you know, they say we want to use it all to have a war in Iran or wherever it might be they want to have a war. I mean, you can't rule that out. I mean, there's no guarantees in life.
So my question is, in your expert opinion, does the social good of preventing those little transactions outweigh just throwing money at the government?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, let me put it this way, I think there's a lot of things we need revenue for, and I think if we're in an environment where we could get the tax, we have a pretty good shot at thinking that the money's going to go for useful things. Yes.
I just wanted to bring to light a tactic that was used to pass the Federal Reserve, which was they had bankers campaign against it so that people supported the bill, and so there's popular support for the Federal Reserve. So the inverse of that tactic can also apply. My question is okay, right now, to my understanding, derivatives and all these exotic financial instruments are working in the shadow world to the degree that we don't really even know the monetary amount. That we don't even know, we have estimates of it's $14 trillion, but nobody really knows. So is kind of the underlying, like the subtext of this proposal saying that we should make all these transactions transparent and fully regulated?
Yeah. So just some more background on that. I mean, one of the issues that led up to the financial crisis was you had massive amounts of derivatives that people had no clue of, regulators at least I should say, had no clue of, and most obviously AIG had issued literally hundreds of billions of dollars, somewhere around $600 or $700 billion in credit default swaps that were on no one's books except their own. So no one knew exactly how much they had outstanding by way of credit default swaps. One of the provisions of Dodd-Frank is supposed to say that all of these things have to go through clearinghouses or exchanges, so there would be a third party there. That's gotten watered down. So, you know, one of the issues is that to be able to tax something, you have to be able to see it. So you do have to regulate it. In terms of, you know, some of the issues about enforcement, though, I mean, one of the things they do in the UK that makes their tax more enforceable is they say you can't actually transfer it. It's called a stamp tax. You can't transfer a share of stock unless you have the stamp showing that you paid the tax. So if you created legal uncertainty, if you said you want to play around trading derivatives or what it might be, you can't claim ownership of the derivative unless you show you paid the tax. I think you get very high compliance. So there are things you can do. The one other thing I like is that it's very rare that these hedge fund guys or whatever, that they're literally doing the trading themselves. You know, in other words, they usually have assistants. They have, you know, people working for them. If you said we're going to give you a reward, you know, 10% of the tax, well, there's a lot of people who really get a big kick out of making millions of dollars by putting their boss in jail. So there's things you can do. As I say, if we're serious about enforcing it, there are things we can do to make it enforceable.
So maybe just a couple more, and I think we'll leave it in.
Okay.
I think this is a great idea, and I personally think we can do no harm. But going off of the point about how people can move around where they do their trading, so what is there really stopping someone from conducting their derivatives trading? Like, I don't know, in some place like Zurich or Hong Kong or Shanghai, where it's like harder for the U.S. to pressure the government than maybe a tiny country like the Cayman Islands.
There will be issues about making it, you know, evasion. You know, in the European Union, where they're very seriously considering the tax, the European Commission, which this really surprised me because the longest time I was going, oh yeah, nice, I'll never get anywhere. But the European Commission actually is the decision-making body in the European Union system, and they actually recommended the tax. And if they do that, I think the places, I mean, I know Switzerland's not part of the European Union, but I think the places that will act as havens, I think, are relatively few.
Wait, what about China, though?
My guess is that we could get cooperation with China as well. I should point out, China actually, in most of their exchanges, has taxes. I don't know if all, there have been different exchanges across the country, but their major exchanges, they already have financial transactions taxes, so you wouldn't be able to debate it by going to China.
So they wouldn't want it going there. So one last question.
Unless, over here, you said you wanted to.
Could the tax or variation of it be placed at the state level?
That's a really good question. New York State probably could do a very small tax. I mean, this issue of evasion comes up with states even more so than the federal government, because it's obviously easier to move to New Jersey than to go to Switzerland or the Cayman Islands. So you probably could do a very small tax at the state level. I think it'd be, because I know a lot of people are interested in that, and I think it'd be worth a try, but there's a limited, New York could do it for the obvious reason. You have the New York, the NASDAQ, you have the big exchanges there. Chicago, there actually is a group there that's been organizing with several of the unions. I think SEIU's behind it. I think some of the other unions. They've been trying to tax their mercantile exchange. Again, a very small tax. I think they're talking about 25 cents on each option in the future. You could probably do that without seeing, your whole market just go somewhere else. So I think at least those two states could do it because they have big exchanges there. Others, I think it'd be much, much harder to see how you could do it.
So thanks everybody for coming out, and thank you, Dean. Thanks for listening.
No, it's not often you get a lot of people sit around on a rainy Saturday and want to talk about financial transactions.